Welcome to Helping Organisations Thrive. Today I have the pleasure of Sally Tabbner on the show. Good morning to you, Sally.
Hi, good morning.
Really good to see you. You're the CEO of Dementia Support, a sort of a charity that helps those navigate the journey of dementia together. And by no surprise, today we will be exploring dementia in the workplace from 2 points of view. Someone living with dementia as an employee, but also those who are a carer of someone with dementia. So that's going to be an interesting conversation. But before we get into that, Sally, I'd like to ask, what do you love about what you do?
Oh. So my previous background was actually health and social care. I worked at the local authority for 24 years, unbelievably. I know, shock. I don't look old enough, do I? I think coming to work in the voluntary sector has just gives you so much freedom in terms of getting on and getting things done. Always had an affection and always worked in older people's services. I had 3 grandparents all of which had different dementias. And so I'm really passionate about what I do, and what I love on a day-to-day basis is seeing people, carers dropping off their loved ones to us for the day here at Sage House, and then the sigh of relief as they walk out the door so that they've got a bit of space and time to go about a day for themselves. So, which often involves going home and sleeping, actually, or going and do the weekly shop or whatever. It's probably nothing exciting, but I think that's where that's the most enjoyable part of my role, is seeing the difference that the charity can make to people living with dementia and carers and loved ones on a daily basis. It's hugely rewarding.
And I'm sure it is. And I've obviously been to Sage House, and you do an absolutely amazing job with, you are a charity, and obviously you have to find your own money and income, but you do it with such passion and such enthusiasm, and there's such a lot of expertise there. I just want to something about dementia, and these facts may be out of date, so you may have some up-to-date facts, but they say in the UK there's about 850,000 people suffering currently with dementia. 1 in 14 people over the age of 65 will have dementia. And 1 in 6 over 80 will have that dementia, and so it's becoming a prevalent sort of stats. And I've heard some stats, by 2040 might be almost double that. But
exactly,
you can enlighten as we get older and say older longer, as it were. Just to give people some sort of context, it'd be helpful just for you to explain, what is dementia, because there might be some sort of misinformation of what it might be or might not be. So it'd be helpful just to explain what dementia is, Sally.
Sure. So dementia is an umbrella term, essentially, for many different types of diseases and issues with the brain. They come about from there's over 100 different types of dementia. For instance, the most commonly known one is Alzheimer's, and that's the most common form of dementia. But there are a lot of other different types. We've heard recently people with head injuries, so rugby players recently, and a lot of football players suffering. Well, we don't say suffering, actually, to be really clear. We always talk about living with dementia, but who have a diagnosis of dementia as a result of taking belts to the head, etc., when they're playing. So it can come about through very different ways. Some of the common signs associated with dementia, we do have to be really careful when we talk about this, because they can often be confused with other conditions, sort of depression, anxiety, mental health issues can often come across as maybe a dementia in the first place. So I want to be really careful when I talk about this, because we can all think, oh crikey, memory loss, for example, is something, how often do I walk into a room and think, well, what have I walked in here for? What was I doing? Kind of thing. But so I suppose memory loss, difficulty in thinking things through and planning can be something that somebody might talk about experiencing. communication issues, having difficulty maybe finding the right words, which is happening to me a little bit at the moment. But I think that's the unusual situation that I'm in. Maybe problems with sight and visual perception of things, and sometimes normally changes in behaviour and mood might be something that people might recognise as a bit of a signal. Now, as I say, nobody should automatically jump to conclusions that they have a dementia if they're experiencing any of those things. And often the individual wouldn't necessarily have an awareness that there were those particular changes going on. It's often others who will go, "Have you realised that?" or whatever. So, but
That's
dementia,
interesting.
yes.
Does it in terms of people getting first sort of diagnosed with it? Is it more others that have noticed it more than the actual themselves?
I think quite often there might be an awareness for the individual. I think a lot of people mask, and I think loved ones tend to be the people who say, "Oh, I've noticed this slight change or whatever." But that's a really difficult conversation to have, isn't it, with somebody that you love or you spend a lot of time with. But I think it's often others who start to notice changes in behaviour and just changes in the way that person is compared to their normal self, whatever that might be.
And obviously, there's always an assumption that it's just for an old people's type of condition, and obviously younger people, or even 40s and 50s, are experiencing this. And we know that there's been certainly a push from the government for people to try to get people back to work who are in their 50s, and try and sort of fill the sort of talent gap, which is obviously great. But there's the potential sort of not influx, but where people who have dementia might be going back to work. And I'd like to just sort of understand, and from your experience, what are some of the common challenges faced by individuals living with dementia who wish to continue work, and how can, I guess, employers and organizations support them effectively?
It's really challenging, isn't it? And I think especially for younger people, I have this in my head. My thought is that if somebody had a diagnosis of cancer, for instance, they'd feel happier to approach an employer with that rather than dementia, because I think it's about having that real trusting relationship, and you don't necessarily need that when you have something like cancer, because you think, well, actually everyone knows what that is. But I think with dementia, it's kind of a lot of people who haven't necessarily experienced it do naturally think it's an older person's condition for a start. So I think for anyone in the workplace, it's incredibly difficult to have that dialogue, especially, I suppose not so much in an environment such as ours here, or a people-based organisation, as it were. We deal with people issues here. That's our job. But I think if you're in an environment that's very different to that, who maybe doesn't have the kind of HR facilities, aren't so well versed maybe in maybe some of the different policies. We're all about equality and diversity, etc. So I think just being able to have that conversation can be quite challenging, because people have this thought in their minds that it's going to be received not well, basically. And I think there's lots that we can do as employers. There is we need everyone to understand what dementia is. We need all the whole workforce.
Because there's probably a bit of, obviously there's a stigma to it, and obviously this old person thing, but also I think the biggest, I'm just talking personally here, the big thing is I know is memory loss, and that's I don't know, that's the biggest sort of symptom. I don't know, but it seems to be the one I'm aware of.
Yeah.
Having that in a context of work, from a, if you're a leader of an organization, that's quite challenging having somebody who's losing their memory, isn't it? I mean, I'm just being very pragmatic here. I'm going to think about that. But how do we have that conversation? But how do we sort of deal with that sort of impairment of memory loss? I mean, that's quite challenging in a certain context, isn't it?
Sure. Clearly the best thing you can do is put yourself as an individual with dementia and your employer in touch with people who can support this process. Sage House is well versed in that. We've worked with many different organisations and alongside an individual who has a diagnosis to say, actually, these are the practical things that you can put in place. There are a lot of pragmatic solutions to some of the things that we're talking about here, and there's different equipment and technology that can be used, which of course younger person living with dementia is probably using tech to a certain degree anyway. So that's the best thing that can happen. But of course, we have to accept that unless there's, we've had occasions in the past where actually we've worked with employers and looked at, okay, what is approaching it from what can this person do? What skills, because everyone still has skills and expertise to offer, that's the thing about it. And it's tapping into, okay, what are those skills? What is that expertise? Can the role be adjusted, or are there other roles within the organisation that can still be fulfilled? And looking at it from very much the positive perspective, which I appreciate is incredibly difficult in some roles to do.
Yeah, and I think that approach, I like the almost what can you rather than what you can't do. And obviously my question was the memory loss aspect is a negative in a sense, but actually what else can they do in the context of who they are, the experience of 20, 30 years, 40 years of work? Actually, that's a more positive way of seeing the opportunities and the way forward, isn't it?
Absolutely, and I think it has to be for that individual, and that's kind of very much the approach we try and take here to everything in all aspects of your life. If you have a diagnosis or even pre-diagnosis, okay, but that doesn't mean life is over or you have to stop doing things. What you have to do is adjust according to what you are still able to do.
And if there's Scott, carry on, sorry.
No, and I think and I appreciate if I were to get a diagnosis now, I'm sure even my board of trustees would be going, okay, how do we deal with this? Because there'd be some aspects of the role that I probably wouldn't be so good at anymore, kind of thing. But it is about I know we talk about reasonable adjustments all the time for anyone who has a condition, but I suppose from a dementia perspective, it's a very different way of looking at it, because it's okay, what is still achievable.
And how do we help employees through that almost potential loss of ability or loss of different role? I mean, it's quite a challenge, that, isn't it?
Yeah, a real challenge. I think it is about talking openly, feeling able to have some of those conversations. I think that's often the difficulty of what can I say, what shouldn't I say, that kind of what's almost that political correctness of what am I okay? And often people say nothing at all. But I think there is about checking in on a regular basis, supporting that person, linking them into other services and support that's available to them. So I think as an employer, one of the best things you can do is have that knowledge in your back pocket of what is available locally. The same for carers, making sure if someone's caring, that you have that information of your back pocket about what can you link those individuals into to support them, and then just be open to dialogue on the subject and open to being flexible where you can be.
And what role can employers sort of play in raising, I guess, the awareness and reducing the stigma around dementia in the workplace?
Here we run a dementia supporters program for all companies, and basically we talk to people. We'll come along and talk to the whole workforce about dementia, what dementia is, importantly, what dementia isn't. We talk about services and support that's available. And I think the more people, if the culture of the organisation is such that people are comfortable with the word dementia, understands what it means, then that makes people able to come forward when there is an issue of some kind. But I think that's the best thing. For me, that would be the best thing that any organisation could do, is to make sure that their employees have an oversight of dementia. And I think you can include that at really early stages, you know. Okay, again, different for us here. But I'd be talking to people about having it put into induction programs, for instance. You know, quite often you'll have a bit of safeguarding training, or you'll have training, you know, that's mandatory. I think if anyone is dealing with people, then dementia training is essential. You know, you're talking about a 3/4 of an hour session for people, and that if you're a customer-facing organisation, you know, you should be looking at that from your customer's perspective, and obviously the employees, and potentially them being carers as well. So,
and I guess it's almost been part of the whole, I guess, diversity, inclusivity type of sort of policy, isn't it? Making sure that we are been inclusive with whether somebody has a disability, or somebody may be struggling caring for somebody with cancer. There's various things that happen in the life of people, and I think there's a lot more awareness that when people come to work, they've got a whole backlog of personal stuff going on in their lives, and we need to be a bit more mindful of that. And I guess from a leader, from a manager's point of view, what are the things we should be looking out for? Not constantly looking for people with dementia, but what could be the sort of telltale signs that you may be sort of nuanced, that may think to explore with somebody, or explore with somebody who can perhaps provide the actual appropriate support?
As in, so from an employee's perspective?
Well, if I'm a leader of a business, and
Yep.
and I've got people that work for me, what things, behaviours, or things I might need to spot out for, in terms of thinking that somebody may have dementia, or some challenges that I need to sort of approach? Is there things they can watch out for, or is it, or allow people to come forward for themselves? What's the best way of doing that?
I think open dialogue. I suppose, you know, we practice, you know, on monthly sit down chats with people, and we actively ask the question of how are you doing, how are things, you know, having that dialogue about home life. I think there's a thing around the workforce, a culture within a workforce of looking after one another, and keeping an eye for one another. And I think people having relationships whereby they will spot if somebody is slightly struggling, or something doesn't seem quite right, being open to have that dialogue with the individual and say, is everything okay? It's okay to sit down and go, you know, tell me to shut up if I'm, but is everything okay? You know, I'm worried that, you know, you seem to be a bit off colour, something doesn't seem right, you know, anything that we can support with or help with. And that's just as it should be anyway, isn't it?
You're talking about something which I think it's that part of a culture where people feel safe to share if they've got some challenges, feel safe to bring that forward without fear they're going to get, lose their job or lose opportunities in the organization, isn't it? It's that, it goes back to that fundamental of how you create a culture of openness and transparency. And I think it's, but is there anything particular from a dementia point of view we need to think about in that context as well?
I don't know. I think it is just open dialogue. I
Yeah.
really do. I think it's about, a culture of an organisation has to be, and it does come from leadership, doesn't it? It comes from that place of actually we care, we
Mm.
genuinely care. You know, every leader, every good leader I know has an emotional intelligence
You'd hope
about
so.
them. Yeah, absolutely. And can identify when things just aren't quite right.
Mm.
And I think the ability for anyone, I really believe that anyone within our organisation here would feel comfortable in coming, not just about dementia, but about anything,
Mm.
and stepping forward and actually go, actually, I need a bit of help with, and it's that two-way thing of what can we do to support and what support might an individual need, and then feeling comfortable to come forward.
Mm. Just thinking of the people who might be carers of, their parents who've got dementia. What sort of things can, I guess, an employer do in that context to sort of help balance their responsibilities and support and policies and things?
I suppose, again, what we're often finding in these situations is that it's not just about having maybe parents who are living with dementia, but also having children to care for as well. So it's almost a double whammy of caring responsibilities quite often. I suppose things like flexible working, it's some of the good old fashioned kind of carers' rights, if you like, in terms of being able to take time out to go to important appointments or to accompany to do various tasks, which again is can be incredibly difficult for certain organisations depending on what you do.
Mm.
I guess the ability to change your working pattern can be really helpful when you have caring responsibilities. And I suppose, and I even look at it from my mother's perspective. She was caring for my grandfather with dementia, working full time actually within the NHS. And she felt she was very much singled out when she couldn't get to a certain meeting, for instance, because he had an appointment which she had to accompany him to.
Mm.
I think, again, it comes back to putting people in touch with organisations and people who can support.
Mm.
So ensuring people understand not just what their rights are, but what support there is available to access.
Mm.
And, I think we can't expect all organisations to have that information at their fingertips. All of the, details around actually you've got a right to 1 week's unpaid carers leave every year, which actually you do. But what we can do is to support with that and say how that might be best used.
And just thinking wider than the organisation, what role does the, I guess, community have within the context of dementia?
Incredibly important, again, around education and understanding of people living with dementia, understanding that communication might be slightly different and the way that we communicate, but we need people to understand that. I think there's a language thing. For instance, we use, the word suffering came up earlier, and actually we need to talk about it in a positive way, it not to be seen as something, because I think people have in their heads what dementia is, and it's so different these days. It's not, it's not what people think it is. So the more education and the more understanding everyone can have of what dementia actually is, how it affects people, the fact that it affects everybody differently. And I think that, again, this is some of the difficulty here with dementia, is that everybody's experience of dementia is different. The behaviours, the communication, the different parts of the brain do different things, and therefore no one's journey is ever the same as the next person. So it's about looking at the individual, and that's the lesson actually from both the community and employer, of whatever perspective you're looking at it from, is, you know, ultimately, that is not dementia. Dementia is not the person. Sally is still the person. She might have a dementia, but ultimately she's still Sally. And if there is some kind of behaviour, if Sally says the wrong thing or is inappropriate, that is the dementia. That is not Sally.
And obviously, dementia is a cruel condition. From what I know, I've never witnessed it firsthand, but what I know about it is very cruel. How can we give people, not only who have it, but people who care for people, hope with it?
Again, it comes back to looking at what is possible. What can we still do? It is about looking at things from a positive perspective. Don't get me wrong, it is terrible. It is, you know, every carer I've ever spoken to will always say, you know, carers enter a grief process before the person's passed away, because they're losing that person in front of them. But it's about being able to make sure that there is access to all sorts of activities and supports, making sure that we're doing as much as possible to support people to still live their lives, whatever they're able to achieve.
And with all what you're doing at Sage House, and you do a great job, and it's fantastic. If there's one thing that you would like to achieve this year for you as a charity, what would that be?
Oh, there's lots of things. So currently, Sage House is a one-off. It's the first of its kind in the UK. We have everything under one roof here, so it doesn't matter what part in the journey somebody's at. They can come along to Sage House. We run different activities. The big thing I'd like to achieve this year, and we are getting there now, but you know, ultimately we need more Sage Houses across the UK. That has to be the thing. So I might not achieve it this year, but certainly we're being evaluated academically at the moment to really identify, because actually people's quality of life is better as a result of coming through Sage House and using our services and accessing them. And we are stopping people having to go into residential and nursing care. We are stopping people from having to keep going to their GPs and knocking on those doors. So we just need more Sage Houses elsewhere in the country.
That's the big dream, is it?
Yes, I'll call it a dream, but it will happen. So,
or vision. Vision's probably a better word, isn't it?
Vision's a better word. Yeah. That is the vision, and it will happen.
Fantastic. I love that. That's so inspiring, and I've loved how you've shared about and dispelled some myths about dementia on our chat as well, and how it's important to play, as employers need to play a role with this. So important for that as well. If people want to get in touch with you, Sally, and connect with you, what's the best way of doing that?
Do go online, dementiasupport.org.uk. You can also give us a call at Sage House on 01243 888 691. As I say, you know, the biggest thing you can do is get in touch with people who know stuff about dementia, and that's us. So yeah, do get in touch, and we'll do everything we can to support you as an organisation, you as an individual living with dementia, whichever aspect.
Thank you for your time today, Sally.
No, thank you. Good to talk to you.